words and expressions. So some of them, such as idioms and collocations, have been known for quite some time, but they are meaningful units that you can learn as wholes. But also you can, expressions like this, things like that, or even whole lexicogrammatical patterns can be considered as chunks if they were learned as such. So that they were learned as wholes without analyzing them into individual bits. So for example, you can learn things like, where do you live? Is a question you ask people, when you want to make small talk with them, without really understanding what the role of do in that question. Yeah, or things like I don't know, without really analyzing what don't is there, what role it plays. And of course, these chunks exist not only in English. There are some examples here from German, just to show you how they are very common in language use. Of course, I'm sure you can come up with many examples from Russian. I'll just give you some examples from just some facts about chunks of language. They are ubiquitous in language use. Estimates suggest that anywhere between 55 to 80% of our discourse consists of language chunks. Now, you probably wonder why there's such a wide range. Well, it will depend, of course, on the genre, on the kind of discourse. So, in written discourse, do you think it will be more in spoken or in written? Spoken. Spoken discourse is highly formulaic. So, for example, when you go shopping, you hardly produce any new language. You would say, what are you looking for? How can I help you? Or can I help you? I'm looking for in size, etc. Or have you got this in? So they help us realize various functions when we want to check in a hotel or rent a car, etc. They've been shown to be a basis of fluency. So basically, when native speakers, I'm not supposed to say native speakers, it's a bad word these days. When competent language users speak fluently, they retrieve from memory whole chunks of language, rather than build sentences on a word-by-word basis. And I deliberately left a question mark, but can they serve as a vehicle for language acquisition? As they do for children. It seems it does work in the case of first language learners, like with the examples I gave you with Nora and with Deb Roy's child, who produced Daddy Read or Throw Me without first segmenting those sequences into individual components. The question is, can it work in second language acquisition as well? Now, my personal experience shows that it does. How many of you have been to Prague? Prague in Czech Republic? Yeah. Okay, if you have, you must have heard this announcement on the Czech metro, which is very similar to the announcements on the Russian metro. Yeah, and I will try my best. Okay, it goes like this. Ukončiti výstup a nástup. Do you know how it continues? Okay, I will say the continuation of the phrase. Tell me how many words you think there are there. So, ukončiti výstup a nástup, dveřice zavírali. 2 words. That's exactly what I thought for many, many years. And I think my first time in Prague was in the early 90s. I was in my teens. Only last year did I realize that actually this ukončiti, dveřice zavírali is not 2 words as I thought. It's actually 3 words. The particle s in Czech is a particle used for reflexive verbs, similar to zakryvается in Russian, kind of the same thing. So it's actually 3 words. So I knew it and I could produce it for many, many years without actually segmenting it, without realizing that it consists of 3 words. Okay, I'll give you another example from language I'm sure nobody knows here, Hebrew. Okay, so the word thank you for Hebrew is toda. Toda. So can you please all repeat after me? Toda. Okay. So now I will ask you to say toda, and I will say sort of the equivalent in Hebrew of you're welcome. Okay? So I would like you to say, sorry. Toda. Toda. Ein badma. Once again. Ein badma. How many words are there? Well, because I showed it before I was supposed to. So yeah, but for many learners of Hebrew, who start learning Hebrew, they don't realize, they think it's just 1 word or maybe 2 words, whereas in fact it's 3 words. Actually, it's ein be'ad ma. Okay, so actually be'ad is also, it can be further segmented into 2 words because it's a preposition. The next example I'm sure you all know in French, je m'appelle. How many words are there? Well, again, but then you knew that. But for many, you just learn je m'appelle without actually segmenting it. You know, je m'appelle is what you say in French when you want to introduce yourself. Okay, and only later can you actually realize that it consists of je m'appelle. Yeah. And actually, French is the next example I would like to share with you. Not example of French, but example of learners of French as a foreign language. The study was conducted in England, and it's known as the Southampton study. Now we're moving over to teenagers. There were middle school learners of French. So what the study showed, they memorized on this initially whole chunks of language and memorized sequences like je m'appelle to produce novel utterances. So for example, and actually the teacher actively encouraged it. So what she did, for example, they memorized comment t'appelles-tu, which is French for what's your name, or literally what are you called. And then, let's say, you can get by with it for a while, but then you want to say new things, you want to be creative with language. So what do you think they did when they wanted to say, like, what's his name? Or what's her name? So what they did, they would still say comment t'appelles-tu, and then they would add le garçon, which is grammatically incorrect, but it helped them sort of communicate their message. So they relied on those chunks because it shows that they internalized them as unanalyzed wholes until eventually they segmented them into their constituent bits, and grammar sort of fell into place, and they started to produce correct utterances, which would be comment s'appelle-il, and non comment t'appelles-tu. So here there are the correct conjugations in French the way they're supposed to be. Now, and this is some sort of conclusions from this study. So learners early correctly produced utterances are chunks. And those chunks sometimes are at a higher level than learners' current level of linguistic competency. So if I could sort of translate it into English, imagine sort of learners producing things like, where do you live, my early example, or I've never been there, without actually formally learning the rules of the present perfect yet. They simply learn, I've never been there as a chunk, or I didn't have time, without sort of analyzing it into its past simple auxiliary verb did, etc. Okay, and then what's interesting, that eventually when grammar catches up with their oral production, holistic learners, those who rely on memorized chunks, may actually be better at grammar than the ones who delve into analysis straight away, which is, I find, is also very interesting. But now, there are sort of 2 approaches, if I could sort of really horrendously simplify this whole field of applied linguistics. There are 2 approaches to grammar acquisition in L1. So if, let's say, early approaches, such as Chomsky, who we talked about earlier, would say that children do not learn rules of grammar because they are innate, because they were born with this language acquisition device. Recent research seems to kind of converge and show that grammar is simply an abstraction of regularities in the input we're exposed to. So we see lots of utterances following the same pattern, and then we slowly extract grammar from them in second language. The question is, does the same thing hold in L2? Now, in this final study I would like to share with you, let's see how adults learn second language. Another study conducted by Alison Ray, I showed you her picture earlier. It's known as the Cardiff Cartoon Study because it was conducted in Cardiff, in Wales. And what they did, they presented adult learners with a series of cartoons showing very common kind of social situations. And they asked learners to respond, like, what would you say in this situation? So Matt and Helen are about to walk into a room. Matt wants to be polite, be a gentleman. So he holds the door open for Helen and says,
Ladies first.
yeah, he should say ladies first, yeah, or after you. So interestingly, most of us produce lady first. Why do you think they produce lady first? Well, of course, there's only one lady in the picture. So clearly, they have been exposed to ladies first, because otherwise how would they produce it? But what they did, they analyzed it too soon. They segmented it, because they're adults, they're cognitively mature, they already have grammar in place, they already know it's plural. So if there's one lady in the picture, I should adapt it and say lady first. So adult learners' approach to language learning seems to be sort of, instead of acquiring and internalizing whole chunks of language as children do in both L1 and L2, is to break it down, extract rules, and then try to put them back together, not often very successfully. Or as Alison Ray herself calls this approach, it's the Lego approach to language learning. But also, I can't keep thinking that also partially it's us teachers we're to blame for this, for promoting this kind of approach. Because if you look at the young learners classroom, there's lots of chunk learning going on. Yeah, you introduce learners to lots of chunks without analyzing them. You teach them let's go without really delving into the analysis where it's let us, etc. They just acquire it as a chunk, let's go. Or where do you live? I don't know. How are you? But whereas when they reach middle school, high school, we start going sort of using this approach. Yeah. So we teach them now past simple. I went. So now immediately I have to teach them the affirmative form, the interrogative form, and the negative form, instead of sort of continuing with this chunk learning. So my conclusion is basically we should encourage more language learning in chunks. And very briefly, just some sort of conclusions and some practical implications. It's very important to expose learners to chunks. A very good way of doing it is providing authentic input, such as songs, movies, authentic text. But of course, exposure alone is not enough, and learners need explicit focus in the classroom. Chunks should form part of a language learning syllabus. Learners should be shown strategies, how they can record and practice chunks, and you as teachers should try to set up situations in which they can reuse and recycle those chunks of language to provide learners with opportunities for retrieval and practice. Lots of grammar can be taught, so-called difficult grammar can be taught as chunks. And difficult grammar, of course, will depend on the level of the learning. Let's say, for grade 4 or 5, it could be things like, I've never been, or do you know? And for adult learners, you can easily teach the dreaded third conditional as a chunk. Had I known, I would have, etc. Without moving into grammatical analysis too soon, because just like with Nora, and just like with Deb Roy's-child, as we see, memorization precedes segmentation. So first learners acquire holistic chunks, and only later do they break them down into their individual bits. Thank you very much, and you can find